declaring the meeting open to the public. Thank you. Okay, now we're all sitting comfortably. We're formally open now to the public, and could I just remind members of the usual protocols around the use of electronic tablets and so on, and remind everyone in the room, please, if you switch off all the electronic devices like telephones and so on. Okay, have we any apologies to record? Well, apologies from Fran McCann. And apologies from Michael Copeland. Any other apologies to record? None to record, then we can move on. Just to end matters arising, to remind members that responses to the Pensions Bill consultation have been received from the Commissioner for Older People and the Equality Commission. Both intend to make a submission, but have not indicated any intention to give oral evidence to the committee. NILGA have also raised some points in relation to the bill. Like members to note that we will obviously need to consider the stakeholders' written submissions before inviting those stakeholders to give oral evidence. It seems unlikely that any additional stakeholders will be called then to give oral evidence this side of the Christmas recess. And that being the case, we might want to consider them. As you know, we'll have a meeting scheduled for the 9th of December. We might want to consider whether that meeting needs to go ahead. And we can discuss that maybe perhaps a wee bit later. Certainly, I think, if we do have written submissions, then we probably do need to take the time to consider them, and we may want to do that on the 9th of December anyhow, so that we are ahead as far as we can do on the deliberation of this particular bill, but we can discuss that a wee bit later on, after we have the briefing this morning. We're on, obviously, members, we're on this special meeting to consider the Pensions Bill, and this is at committee stage, and we have a briefing this morning scheduled from NIPSA colleagues. The Bumper Graham from NIPSA and John O'Farrell from ICTU are here this morning, and could I formally welcome both of you here this morning, gentlemen, to make your submission verbally and to deal with maybe some of the issues more directly with members here this morning. Could also remind people that departmental officials are here also this morning and have committed to being here today for the duration of the evidence, and indeed we can avail then of discussing any issues which we feel appropriate with the department officials after this particular submission. Could I remind members then that your NIPSA written submission is included in, I think it's a 7. In your written submissions tab 7, your bill folder. Without any further ado then, could I then just sort of pass over then to Bumper and John then to, if you want to add anything to your written submission, I'm sure you do, maybe reinforce a number of your points. So, very welcome and thank you for being here. And
okay, thank you very much, Chairman and members. NIPSA has been interested in this issue for some time. In fact, give evidence the last time there was a pensions bill in front of this committee when the state retirement age was raised to 66. We see this as a twin approach issue. First of all, the general public policy issue about the provision of state old age pensions to everyone in society, and then also the link with occupational pensions, and particularly the changes in public service pensions recently that link the retirement age in occupational pensions to the state pension age. I suppose in this last couple of weeks, and in fact no later than this morning, when there was a piece on Radio Ulster, and Mark Durkan and former DWP Minister actually debating whether or not this piece of legislation will survive much more than a few years, and certainly it was pretty depressing listening to that, to think that the issue of pension provision is continuously going to be eroded, and that we will see people probably well into their 70s before they qualify for an adequate state pension. We did comment in our submission that the overall aim of the Westminster Government in this, list of para 29 in the submission of January 13, is to actually reduce GDP expenditure by 2060 from 8.5% to 8.1%. Now, the fact is that the UK is, if you were in a football analogy, it's certainly in the relegation zone en route to the Championship. I'd probably say it's probably in the old 4th Division en route to the Conference in terms of how it treats pensioners, in terms of the level of income guaranteed to pensioners, and is certainly way behind the vast majority of states in the European Union. And these proposals, based on the premise of reducing GDP expenditure, will not do anything to enhance the position of our pensioners and to bring them out of poverty. There was also, I think last week, some commentators being rather optimistic about the DSD publication of the 25th of November on the report Households Below Average Income Northern Ireland Stats, when they claimed that the relative position of pensioners in poverty had improved in Northern Ireland, which isn't true, because the statistics are based on 60% of average household income. Now, because of the triple lock, pensioners have got, on this last number of years, a 2.5% increase in the value of the state pension. But people, whether it be in the private or public sector, have faced wage restraint of 0 to about 1% pay increases. So the real value of those households is actually going backwards in terms of the economy. And pensioners are making a marginal improvement on that purely because of the 2.5% triple lock. It does nothing in totality to lift pensioners out of poverty. And we still see citizens of the UK as being one of the most disadvantaged when it comes to pensions. Other aspects of the bill are also very worrying. The increase in state pension age progressively, and the previous legislation, I have to declare an interest here, I suppose, hit me. I was looking forward to my state pension at 65. I now have to wait to 66. Despite the fact I thought I had a contract with the government and I've been paying my national insurance contributions ever since 1974. The government shredded that contract that I entered into on that. They're now saying that from 2026 it will increase to 66, and thereafter in each Parliament there will be a review and the age will lift. And we do face the prospect in the not too distant future of people probably having to be in their 70s before they can claim an adequate state pension. Like we said at the time of the Public Service Pensions Bill, that has a detrimental impact on the economy on a number of fronts. First of all, there's job displacement, because if people have to work longer before they are entitled to and can claim their pension, they will stay in those jobs if they're lucky to have them for a longer period of time, thus denying those job opportunities to people in the labour market who are seeking to either return to employment or to find employment having come out of school, college or university. There are also other aspects that will do significant damage to the remaining number of defined benefit pension schemes with the removal of contracting out. Now, if you look at public servants, who I can speak about best, they have, for this last 3 years, had to contribute more to their pension. When the new schemes come in next year, they'll contribute yet again more in order to get less and wait longer to get it. But then in 2016, because of the ending of contracting out, they will have to find an additional 1.4% as an employee. And also, and at a time when the budget is being debated in Northern Ireland, employers, including public service employers, will have to find an additional 3.4% national insurance contributions. And an already intolerable position for our public services, that will push many over the edge. And what does it get them? It gets them nothing. Because those people who are currently contracted out will not get the benefits of the full single flat rate pension. And going forward, the change from 30 to 35 years qualifying for it is unfair. If the government had wanted to be fair on this, what they would have done is they would have linked the increasing number of years in contribution to the increasing age limit. So they would have moved progressively. If you move the age at which you get the state pension up by a year, then move the qualification period up by a year. But they've gone for this massive leap from 30 to 35. And I have looked at stuff in Britain, particularly on the DWP website, and I find that it is a jungle. I don't know how ordinary people, and I spend a lot of my time working in pensions, and I can't understand it, how ordinary people who have little knowledge and little interest till pensions virtually come to their door will be able to understand these changes is beyond me. There's an online calculator which is gobbledygook, and nobody will know what they're entitled to, when they're going to be entitled to it. And the big question that I have is, what if people don't meet the full 35 years? What is the safety net going to be? And this is particularly important as well for people who are in private sector pension schemes, as nearly everybody will be because of auto-enrolment into Nest, because they will get just a pure cash pension pot, which is unlikely to be turned into an annuity because of the charges that are made for annuities and the anti-annuity propagandas out there. They will seek to take cash. Now, if they seek to take cash, they take more than 25%. Our friends in HMRC will rub their hands with glee and say, oh, great, more money that the taxman can take off you. They then get this pot of money, and a lot of people will look at that pot of money and say, oh, great, I can have the round-the-world cruise, I can buy the new car, whatever, and then find that they cannot go and get the equivalent currently of pension credit. And there's a big flaw in the legislation going through Westminster and related to this bill about pension liberation. I do consider that this cash pot is another form of pension scam, and I could guarantee if I'm able to come back here in 20, 25 years' time, the next big mis-selling thing will be this issue about people releasing their pensions to cash pots. The other aspect in this is, and there was an interesting report a couple of weeks ago by Touchstone. This really worries me because it says from the age of 53, that is the typical point, and I quote, when the accumulation of crystallised intelligence, i.e. the benefits of experience, no longer outweigh the decline in fluid intelligence that begins from the age of 20. So in other words, once you pass 53, your judgment becomes highly suspect, particularly in financial planning. And the new defined contribution aspects of this bill very much relate to that. And I think we are going to go into a position of massive abuse and mis-selling and misapplication of cash pots for pensions. One of the things that we put into our submission as well was that the unions in relation to public service pensions did agree to a legislative consent motion to stop public servants being able to transfer their benefits out from a defined benefit scheme into a defined contribution scheme and then get the cash pot. There's a loophole there in that the government only determined that was for the unfunded schemes, because the Treasury would then have to go and hand money over to the private sector. They left the position for the likes of the NILGOS scheme and indeed for the Northern Ireland Water scheme, that people in those schemes can transfer their defined benefits to defined contribution and get the cash pots. And I think that is a loophole that needs closing, because all we're doing is building up massive problems down the track and claims on the state to have additional support for pensioners who get themselves into financial difficulties. as a consequence of moving to a cash liberation type scheme. In conclusion, as I say, the general proposals on a flat rate scheme we would broadly endorse, but we'd only endorse them if the level of the flat rate scheme is of a sufficient level to really start to eradicate pensioner poverty, to allow pensioners in the UK to enjoy their retirement. We don't think that the link of ever increasing the age of the state pension is fair. It will do damage to the employment market and job displacement. And also, there is a correlation between working longer and living a shorter life. And we will see a disimprovement in the mortality tables as time goes forward as a consequence of this. And what we want to see is a proper pension scheme. People making contributions, yes, through national insurance, but on a fair and just and equitable system. And certainly this bill doesn't do that. And what it does do is helps the Office of Budget Responsibility and the British Treasury long-term goal by 2060 to actually reduce expenditure on pensions rather to increase expenditure on pensions.
Okay, Bumper. Do you want to be anything that Mark can make? No.
No, primarily, I mean, I'm here on behalf of the wider trade union movement to start to just reiterate, it won't be necessary, but to reiterate that Bumper Graham is our leading expert on the subject of pensions as a whole. As you are also aware, that Bumper's been a long servant on the board of Nilgosk. Just primarily just say that what Bumper is saying has the backing of the entire trade union movement.
Okay, thank you for that. Bumper, can I just ask for bringing members? What are the key points of objection to the bill as it stands at the moment?
I think in terms of the age of retirement, that's the first one, both for older people and also on labour displacement. Secondly, in terms of the changes to the contribution from 30 to 35 years as a straight move without a progressive move, the impact it will have on occupational pensions by the ending of contracting out, and then within the parts of the bill that deal with defined contribution pensions, the link to the cash pot approach, which is a form of pension liberation, which will see, I think, mis-selling and misuse of pension cash pots going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Maggie Brady.
Yeah, thanks very much for the presentation. I listened to the item on this morning as well, and I was depressed because a lot of it seems to be predicated on the fact that people are going to be supplementing their savings. The difficulty is, of course, if you don't have enough money to save, then you're going to be in real trouble. And recent reports have indicated very clearly that the average disposable income in houses in the north is less than half of that in Britain. So, you wonder how people are going to be able to save. That's the first thing. The other issue you raised was pension credit, because there's going to be no, if you like, safety net in a sense, because obviously it's used to supplement pensions. The other thing that was very clear in that item this morning was that once the legislation goes through, the age will just continue to go up. And one of the points they were making was that in Britain, I think there's over 1 million people over 65 still working, which is fine if you're healthy and able to and have a job that you like and all of that kind of thing, but that doesn't apply to everybody. And I think that therein lies some of the difficulty that people are going to face. The other point is they made much about the £144, and yet if you go back 5 years ago, the government were saying that the minimum should be about 175 to 185. It's constantly gone down. So it leaves people in an invidious position, and they continue to do that, apart from the age thing, because that's just, logically this legislation goes through, you could be working until you're 80 eventually. So that's the reality of it all.
Yeah, I think that a couple of points. when the UK government introduced auto-enrolment, the trade unions were supportive of the principle. However, auto-enrolment, unless, and it's in a minority of cases, you can be enrolled into a decent employer's existing occupational pension scheme, you're then auto-enrolled into NEST, which is a defined contribution scheme with pretty minimal levels of input. And I think that was really just a con that would therefore take people just above the threshold going forward where they would be entitled to pension credit. So it was a long-term strategy for the government to alleviate their role and responsibility for meeting the needs of pensioners. In terms of Northern Ireland, I think you're right about the disposable income aspect, and I've made the point as well about how I think that the DSD report of last week was certainly overplayed in many respects. One of the things that I've been keen to promote is a concept of a flexible decade of retirement, whereby, whether it be 65, 66, 67, that many people who are not able to retire will work past it, and hopefully they can do so that in a proper physical and mental state. But there will be others who, because they have been in decent occupational pension schemes, might decide to go early. And that hopefully would balance out, and I think as time goes on, probably the scales would fall heavier on those that would work past, say, 65 or 66. And that would still allow then the better flexibility in the labour market, and would certainly allow people to go early to create job opportunities. And it's a question of, where do you want the Social Security spent? Do you want the Social Security spent on pensions, or do you want it to be on unemployment benefits? And I think anybody of a right mind would say they'd rather it was spent on pensions rather than on unemployment benefits. So I think there can be research done into the flexible decade approach. I think in terms of Northern Ireland, we do need research, and we encouraged it but weren't able to get it at the time of the public service pensions debate as to the labour displacement issue. And I think in conclusion, yes, the level at which the single flat rate pension is being set still falls very far below what is the true level of poverty for not just for pensioners but for anybody in our society.
Well, just a couple of points. I mean, we talk a lot about fuel poverty, but the reason you're in fuel poverty because you're in poverty. Simple as that. There's two other points. Just with the increase in zero-hour contracts, that's going to leave a lot of people in the future with absolutely no pension rates in that sense at all. The other thing which is sort of strikes you about this particular bill, partners or spouses will no longer be able to claim on their spouses' contributions. It's a big factor for people who for many reasons could not work over a long period of time and was relying, particularly when women pension age was 60, where they were able to claim sooner and put some money into the household. I think that's quite an issue as well.
Okay, John wants
Just
to say something on zero hours.
On zero hours contracts. Our concern is that zero hours contracts would exacerbate a trend that's been evident for a long time in the private sector in Northern Ireland. And that is that we've got, you're all familiar with the statistics, that 95% of registered businesses in Northern Ireland employ fewer than 10 people. In fact, about half of those businesses consist of one person, be it a small farmer, someone in the construction industry, and so forth. Most people who are self-employed, and I speak of someone who used to be self-employed as a freelance journalist, you're not in a position to plan sensibly for the long term, like have a pension scheme. As a consequence of that, but also as a consequence that there are so many small employers in Northern Ireland who can't afford to have their employees on an occupational pension. As a consequence of all of that, we already have by far the highest proportion of old people in Northern Ireland who are solely dependent on a state pension. There's nothing else there. There's just the state pension. So as a consequence, they're just solely dependent upon that. Our concern, as you were saying, about zero-hours contracts, and we're seeing them spreading into the public sector like a vile virus that they are. That leads also to the whole sense of uncertainty that we have with this. And the broader issues to do with zero-hours contracts also have just create chaos with long-term planning. You can't really engage in something major, like for example, planning a mortgage, if you're on zero-hours contracts and you're not sure, what your salary is going to be on next month, let alone 5 years' time. So as we create a more precarious working class, the chances, what you will have, despite, here's the contradiction with all the language you get about welfare reform from people like Ian Duncan Smith, about that it's about trying to end dependency. The consequence of all of this changing with the system, the consequence of all this increased precariousness of working people, means that people in an older age, when they become vulnerable, are actually more dependent upon the government as the ultimate safety net, which gets to where our concern at the base of this legislation. Bumper mentioned earlier the famous Lamborghini pensioners that we hear a lot about, people flogging off their pension pot, buying a Lamborghini, and then reaching the age of 65. And they're still going to need money to live on. Is the government seriously going to turn around and say, no, you spent the money on a Lamborghini, the petrol's run out, and now you're going to starve? Then, in other words, where is the safety net, and who ultimately is going to pick up the tab? Because what I suspect is that, as usual with these circumstances, this is what will happen. The state will pick up the tab, but in the meantime, you can be damn sure that the accountants in the City of London will cream off a huge amount of the glorified mis-selling Bumper was referring to earlier.
Okay, just mention very briefly, Mickey mentioned the issue of spouses and. The Westminster Parliament, be it Labour or Conservative Liberal coalitions we currently have the most bizarre interpretation of equality. It really relates to the equalisation of misery. Because they said to women, oh, we're going to make you equal under the eyes of pension legislation, but that means you've now got to wait till you're 65 to get your pension. And then as soon as they got to 65, they then said, oh, and here's the kick with the other foot, we're now going to make it 66 or more. And there is a similar issue in this in relation to not a decent transitional period where people will be able to get the full single flat rate state pension based on their own national insurance record. And it again is an attempt, I think, by the Treasury to force through savings rather than seek to provide a fair pension to everyone.
Thanks.
Okay, Tommy.
In your submission, you state your 4 guiding principles, one of which is that a greater proportion of public expenditure should be spent on state pensions. If a greater proportion of public expenditure should be spent on state pensions, where would you see, given all of the other demands that we hear you making on the radio every week, practically, Punter, where would you see the reductions being made in order to have this switch?
Well, I suppose I wish I was talking to somebody when you were still the finance minister and I said, I'll job swap with you. I think I would have produced a better finance minister than yourself, with due respect, because what we in the trade union believe in is that we have plenty of money in this country. The UK,
tell us about it.
Well, the UK is the 6th richest economy in the world. There are over £100 billion not collected properly from big business. The amount of tax avoidance and tax evasion that goes on in the UK is unparalleled. So rather than sacking workers in HMRC, they actually employed some workers in HMRC who went about gathering the taxes that are due. Then we would be able to sit in the luxury of dealing with an Northern Ireland budget and say, we've got so much money, we don't know where to allocate it to. So there's a big issue about tax avoidance, tax evasion in the UK, that if we grow our economy by creating jobs rather than destroying jobs, as the current budget will do, then we will increase wealth within Northern Ireland and the UK as a whole. So there are many ways of getting the money in, and it's an undeniable fact. If you want to cherry pick from the submission, I'll cherry pick The fact in the submission is that the words of the British Treasury are that by 2060, their intention is to reduce GDP expenditure on pensions from 8.6% to 8.1%. Now, I hear you and your colleagues, rightly so, talking on many occasions about the plight of pensioners and pensioner organisations. Well, you go and defend your position to those organisations when you say to them that you're supporting a government that's going to take money out of the hands of pensioners and out of the pockets of pensioners who could ill afford it.
And you see, well Bumper, I mean, first of all, it's fine to talk in these kind of very general stuff. Oh, if we collected all the tax, we have to deal with the reality of the money we have. And despite all of the attempts which there have been to collect tax which people owe, there still is that gap. I've no difficulty with that, but we have to deal with the money which we have at present, and to talk about let's grow the economy, let's collect the taxes which we haven't collected. You haven't actually specifically told me.
Okay, I'll give you another one.
Let me finish. You haven't actually specifically told me. Given that we have to deal with the money that we have at present, and we get a wish list from you every time you open your mouth, but never ever any indication as to how that wish list is going to be financed. Here's yet another wish list. But let me come let me just leave that, because I think we could bat that one about all day.
Tommy, let me just come in a wee second. I just want to remind people in the room, this is not a Nolan show.
Sorry, Chairman.
So we don't need to have a political roustabout here between members and witnesses. What we're here to deal with is a pension bill. I might even share some of the discussion points, but it's not specific to the pension bill, with all due respect. So let's try and stick to the bill, and if people want to have a kind of wider political argument, then you're free to go on a Nolan show at any time. I'm sure you will be on there again, but I just want to make a point. There is a serious, and I'm not disputing at all the sentiments that people are expressing, and very well entitled to, and I say I might even share most of it, but we'll have to deal with the specifics of the pension bill.
Okay,
otherwise it'll be here at 3 o'clock.
Can we deal then with just the generalisations we made? If the Joseph Rowntree Trust has actually, despite what you've said, Bumper, has indicated that the reforms overall, 35% of men and 60% of women would see their pension increase, that the largest gains would be for those who spent periods out of labour caring for children, that the average pension income across SPA across all individuals is an increase of 7% for men, or 7% £2.74 for 7% of men, and 26 of women would see an increase of at least £10 per week. So, despite what you've said about how iniquitous this is, and of course the other thing is that, and this to me is a big benefit, that given the level that the basic pension will go up to, people will not have to be means tested claiming pension credit, which we know is one of the biggest ways in which people lose out, because they are not aware of sometimes of what's available. They don't like means testing, they don't like the intrusion, and I must say I'm not into means testing myself. So, do you not accept that there are benefits for a large number of the people, the very people who you have said at present are disadvantaged with the current system?
I think, Chairman, as I said in the introduction, the principle that underpins the single flat rate is one which we do share and enjoy, and we said that in our papers, but we don't believe that the value that is being attributed to it is sufficiently good enough. It will not lift people out of pensioner poverty. It will do away with means testing. That also has implications in terms of employment, I have to say, within the department as well, in terms of the number of jobs in that, but hopefully those people could be put to other useful employment.
HMRC, for example?
Yeah. One of the other things that we could do is look as well at removing the 40% tax relief that goes to higher taxpayers and just give everybody tax relief for pension contributions at the basic rate of 20%. That would go a long way as well to providing additional money, as well as dealing with tax avoidance and evasion that would allow the UK to treat all of its pensioners with dignity.
So you're not disputing, anyway, the Joseph Rowntree figures that a significant number of people will be better off as a result of these changes, that women, especially who have taken time off caring for children, will be major beneficiaries of this, and that generally pensioners will, because they escape the means testing application for pension credit, benefit as well from it.
I think if you look at it carefully, people who would have been below the level would have been entitled to the pension credit, which would get them virtually to the point of the single flat rate pension. So currently, whilst many people don't claim, they can't get to that point. So I don't think that any limited improvements that there are anyway go sufficiently far enough and do anything to really erode or eradicate pensioner poverty.
Well, I mean, but you have accepted that, and the figures are quite staggering. It's well over half the people who are entitled to pension credit don't actually claim it because they don't know about it or they don't like the idea. So those people will benefit, and as a result of the changes, a substantial number of carers, I think it's 60% of people who have been out of work to care for children will benefit, and men. 35% of men and 65% of women will actually have an increase. Let me just come to the other point you made, and that's around the flexibility that people have to claim their lump sum. I mean, do you really not trust people to deal with their own financial affairs when it comes to dealing with coming up to retirement?
I have to say, the evidence which was provided by Nest, and that's a government body, says that in terms of the report that came out from Nest last week. But to answer your question perhaps more directly, how many people have been conned by those involved in the financial industry in innumerable cases of mis-selling? And I think this is another mis-selling opportunity waiting to happen. And I think in 20, 25 years' time, other parts of the financial industry and lawyers will be running similar ads that are being run now about mis-selling. And it is a situation whereby, if two things: one, it isn't limited to 25%. You can take your full pension in cash. If you go over the 25%, which the Treasury would like you to do because they can get their arm into you for tax then. And secondly, people will be short-term about that pot of money. They will not look at as an amount of money that they need to invest to see them through maybe 20, 30 more years in retirement. And I do think it is an absolute disaster waiting to happen.
Well, I mean, first of all, there will... One of the ways in which that can be avoided is to have greater guidance for people when making those choices. Secondly, do you not accept that if someone knows that if I go for more than 25%, I'm getting taxed on it, whereas stay for below the 25%, I'm not getting taxed on it? And do you also not accept that individuals should have the right to, if when coming up to retirement, they need some of the money that they've put aside for their pension, they need that, and they make the judgment that they need that money for a specific purpose when they're coming up to retirement. You know, I can think of lots of useful things, not buying Lamborghinis, that people would decide on, that really it's interference in individuals' own financial affairs for you to say that the state should not allow them to have that flexibility.
The trade union movement has always said that it supported the lump sum element in pensions up to 25%. What we're talking about here is no controls whatsoever. And I think it's quite clear that you're talking to people who are highly vulnerable, may not have much experience of this, and that the financial institutions are sharks.
There's a documentary series on Radio 4 last year about what the city actually does, presented by the journalist David Grossman. You may recall from Newsnight. And he made an absolutely astonishing statistic about what happens to your average pension pot in the City of London. A commission is taken from it 16 times in the average life of a pension. Like many people with what is now called portfolio careers, I have pension schemes that I paid into for a few years, and then I'm kind of basically lying there until I reach an age at which I can take them in. What's happening with that is that every year, like it or not, a compound interest rate of 1.5% is taken out for administration. Now, there's nothing. Yeah, and the stock market hasn't been doing terribly well for the last few years, so conceivably it's gone. The value of it hasn't exactly been booming despite all the administration charges. The City of London has treated pensions, private sector pensions, over the last 30 years as a staggering bonanza. One often hears the comments on pensions from a company called Hargreaves Lansdown. Well, this organisation, which is a trade union research series, do an annual, every year they have a look at what happens to, who are the highest paid people in Britain right now. Well, the fourth highest paid executive in Britain last year was the chief executive of Hargreaves Lansdown. The TUC also have a look at what, how the top end, how the top 1%, how the people running the FTSE 500 companies, the kind of pensions they get for themselves, the kind of pensions they arrange for themselves. And it is absolutely, just staggering. It's beyond the wildest dreams of anybody who fancies buying a Lamborghini once, let alone once a month. So the huge inequalities we're getting within the city are riding on the coattails of the various reforms you've had within private sector pensions over the last 30 years.
That's not an argument for removing from people the freedom to make financial choices about what they do with an asset which belongs to them, i.e. their pension pot. I just find it staggering that the trade unions should want to be as intrusive. I reckon most people will make a decision, because they make these sensible decisions. Most people will make a decision: I want to have saved up for a pension, so I would have an income throughout my time retired, and therefore I want to keep it intact. But you seem to be saying, and quoting what all these big pensions other people are getting, that does not remove from me or from any other individual the right to make a decision.
Chairman, it's not me. I'm quoting from a report produced by Nest, which is a government body, about this. A government body established in order to provide a pension for those that are not admitted into any other occupational pension scheme. And it is saying that the Chancellor appears to assume that by our 50s and 60s, we suddenly become fully engaged, active consumers in a responsive marketplace, suddenly equipped to navigate the choppy waters of inflation and longevity risk alone. Now, do you really believe, Stanley, that an industrial worker left school, maybe without any qualifications, investing in a Nest pension, can then, in the age of 65, 66, come out and make real valued investment judgments about their pension, when the industry out there will be doing its damnedest to make them take that money as a cash pot and invest in not an annuity which will guarantee them an income each year, but in one-off cash expenditure.
And if they do get advice, they're going to get the people who are queuing around the block to give it to them will be companies like Hargreaves Lansdown and the various other offshoots you've had. The PPI scandal that in the British banking sector is of absolutely staggering proportions. It is ultimately going to run into tens of billions of pounds every year. When PPIs were originally missold back in the 1990s, they were buried away in the people's contracts. Ostensibly, people knew what they were signing up to. We now know that people were missold on an absolutely massive scale. our concern is that there will not be the proper systems to protect people from the sharks that are swimming in
And
there.
is that not what you should be asking for? Better guidance, better financial regulation, rather than interference with people's decisions to make, or ability to make decisions about their own affairs?
Well, I need to look back at Hansard, but I'm sure you supported the legislation that established Nest. And the purpose of establishing Nest was to ensure that those who were not in an occupational pension contributed, both them and the employer, in order to secure a pension, not a one-off cash payment going forward. And part of the purpose of doing that was, one, yes, to help the individuals in terms of their income in retirement, but also, secondly, to help the state move away from having to provide pension credit, so that people on an ongoing basis had an additional occupational pension to support the state pension, not to give cash windfalls that city flyboys can have you misuse and misspend.
And I don't think anybody wants that. And that's why guidance, regulation, and proper supervision is imperative with all of this. But I still think that people should have the ability to make their own decisions about their own money.
Can I just on that front, sorry, Mr. Chair, can I just suggest to Mr. Wilson that he needs to continue with that logic. That if that is the case, that the question I raised earlier also needs to be looked at, which is where is the ultimate safety net in these for people who do, maybe are missold dodgy products or who do make bad decisions? What happens then? Sorry.
No, because what I want to do here, I want to just remind people here, there's a bill in front of us, and we're having some very interesting discussions, but some of it doesn't really add at all to the bill. So we'll have to get back to the bill. That's what we're here to discuss, not the wider politics of it and the efficacy of any of these particular schemes. What we want to deal with, if there's a pension bill in front of us, there's 7 parts to it, let's address the bill. That's what yourselves obviously, and you did that in your submission, so let's stick to the bill, please, and please our members as well, because otherwise we're having broader political discussions. That's very important, but not in this particular arena today. Okay, so we'll have Jim.
Yeah, I'll be very quick because I want to go into some business in the Assembly, but obviously you don't like a lot of this bill. You're urging us therefore not to pass the bill, is that right?
We would want to see the bill significantly altered.
Right. In terms of those alterations, have you costed those?
We are not in a position to be able to cost them
You acknowledge
ourselves.
there would be a cost?
As I said earlier, one of the things that we want to see researched are costings, including the labour market displacement costs.
Yes,
vis-a-vis
but the cost of
pension.
not following parity on pensions would obviously, in our financial arrangements, have a very direct and immediate effect.
It may have.
Yes,
But it may be-
inevitably would, I suggest,
All right, just let
on the block grant.
ask one question at a time, Jim, and then let the member. The visitors.
It may have, but it's a question of how you cut the cake. And what we would want to see is Northern Ireland, where possible, providing betterment to its citizens and not taking it on the basis of the equalisation of misery. We think that this bill does a disservice both to people approaching retirement and also to our young people.
Yes, whatever the rhetoric, it inevitably would have a cost. I think you know that with the block grant if we didn't follow pension policy.
Well, as I said to Sammy, there are ways, and I suppose it depends on devolution to some extent as to where authorities lie, but certainly I believe Westminster can provide additional money.
But we here,
If we had the devolved powers,
But we don't.
could raise taxes by doing away with the 40% tax relief, etc. So there's ways of finding the money.
yes, Mr. Graham, we don't have those powers. You talked about the HMRC and doing this and doing that, but that's all beyond the control of Stormont. In terms of the real world of what Stormont controls, if we depart along the road you want us to go, there are inevitable financial consequences in terms of the block grant.
There may be.
Well, I'm surprised that you quibble over that.
Well, as I said, where do we want to spend our money? And I know it's how in which the finances are done, that we're not ultimately responsible for what is paid in terms of unemployment benefit vis-a-vis state pension. But do you want to spend the money on pensions? Do you want to spend the money on unemployment benefit?
Well, maybe do you want to spend the money on schools? Do you want to spend it in the hospitals? Or do you want to spend it in having a different pension scheme?
Well, I'm sure the chairman will reproach me because it's a matter for another place, another time. But this gets you into the much wider debate about the financial position.
The bottom line is
Assembly vis-a-vis Westminster.
The bottom line is you have not costed of what your remedy would be in terms of the Assembly not passing this bill, but you just don't want us to pass key portions of it.
Correct. We think we'd be doing a disservice to the citizens
You
of
think
Northern
that's
Ireland.
helpful to us?
Well, I'm here to represent the NIPSA members in the wider trade union, but also those in society, such as pensioners and potential pensioners who are in greatest need. And I think this bill, as many other parts of the Con-Lib coalition's approach to social security and welfare and pensions, is ultimately, and I refer back to the fact it's going to reduce GDP from 8.6 to 1%. That will do nothing for working people and working pensioners.
Thank you.
Okay, Stuart, are you looking in?
Just briefly, Chair, apologies for coming into the meeting late, and I know you will have checked for matters of interest. I'm a retired member of IPSA and wish to declare that interest.
Okay, sure, thank you for that. Mickey Brady, are you looking back in?
Yeah, just a couple of points. Sammy quoted Joseph Rowntree, and Trust, undoubtedly very good organisation, and undoubtedly some people will get increases, but they don't comment on the amount of the pension actually is, because currently the state pension in Britain and here is the meanest in the developed world. I think we need to be aware of that. I mean, if you look at countries like Germany, where it's approximately almost twice as much that pensioners get there as they get in Britain, and the point has been made it's the sixth richest nation apparently in the world. The other thing you mentioned, Sammy, was about pension credit, and there is a lot of people don't get it, but what you got to realise is that pension credit is just another form of income support for older people, and by the government's own admission, that is subsistence level. So, you know, that's the minimum that you can live on. So I just wanted to make that point, same as income support or the old supplementary benefit or whatever. You know, so in those terms, it's very, very difficult for people to live. And I, in my experience over the years, have found very few people on pension credit, while it supplements state pension, they still find it extremely difficult to live. And I go back to the point about we're trying to do so much for fuel poverty. But fuel poverty is inextricably linked to poverty. It's the amount of money that's coming in and your disposable income, etc. So I think that point needs to be made. But if we go back to the point, and you have to start with the premise that it is the meanest pension scheme in the developed world. And, you know, so when you're making an increase on that, it's still not bringing you anywhere near what you're supposed to be able to live on. And to go back to the point about the £144, 5 years ago the British government were talking about a minimum of 175 up to 180 pounds. So what happened to 40 quid in the meantime, you know? That's fine, thank you.
Fair enough, Mickey, thank you. No other member indicating to ask any question in a minute. Over to yourself or John, any other remarks you want to make at the moment? Because obviously you've heard some of the questions and you've obviously been involved in some of the exchanges, and as I said early on, all very worthwhile, important, fundamental issues, some of which cannot or are not even designed to be dealt with in the bill, which is what we've got to address a specific attention to. I certainly share the argument that there does need to be locally relevant research. We had that discussion around the welfare reform bill. We don't have that dedicated research, and that's something the committee unanimously had actually sought to secure in a time ahead in relation to all these matters. So, I mean, I can share the concerns around that. But there's no other members indicating to speak at the moment. Bumper, do you have any last comments at the moment?
Yeah,
John?
sure. We had a lengthy exchange in and around the defined contribution schemes and moving to single cash pots and stuff. But I mean, clause 43 of the bill says that the Department must make regulations requiring information about some or all of the transactions costs, as John referred to. Some or all, you know, people are going to be investing in pensions, then it's their money. And absolute transparency as to what is happening, their money is needed, not some transparency around their pension investments. And I say, I think I welcome your comments in terms of research. I think there is an issue in terms of job and labour market displacement. And I think going forward, we did see from the 50s through to the current day a fairly progressive improvement because of health improvements and better health and safety in the workplace, improved mortality. Although Northern Ireland still is very far behind the South East corridor in England on that. I think that will begin to drop off for two reasons. One, we can't continue to expect the improvements in health to continue at the pace that they did over that period of time. But secondly, the correlation that if you work longer, you live less. And by increasing the age of the state pension, I suspect it's an unpublished fact of the Treasury that they want people to work till they drop and hope that they never get round to having to claim a state pension.
Okay, Barbara. Okay, John, you happy enough?
Yeah, and just it is worth it. It is just one. I know it's, again, that's a point off the bill, but it's a broad political point. That 105 years ago, one of the great moments in the history of Westminster was David Lloyd George's introduction of pensions, and what happened when the big vested interest of the day, the House of Lords, threatened to stop him doing so. He stood up to them and he made that change. I thought it was very, very significant.
Okay, John, thank you, Thank you, gentlemen, for your written submission and for coming here this morning and having your discussion with the members. So thank you very much, and thank you. You may well want to return to you, and indeed, if yourselves want to get back to us in the short term ahead, then please do. Okay, thank you, members. Thank you, John. Okay, members, as we said earlier on, the department officials are here this morning and have been sitting in on this particular evidence session and did offer to be available to deal with any questions that have arisen in this particular session. I think it would be useful, members are still content that we would invite the department officials to the table, and maybe you could respond directly if you're in a position to do that. On your colleagues are just this morning. You've heard the issues raised. If we can separate out the political discourse with a small p from the matters relevant to the bill. We can probably get that done quite expeditiously.
If they could give us some clarification on the last point, because I think it was a reasonable point, when it talks about providing information about administrative costs, organisation costs, why does it make a distinction between some or all of the information? That would be useful to...
And clause 43.
Clause 43, yeah.
Okay, so can I leave it to yourselves then, just to maybe are you in a position to pick up from that discussion on Gary and your colleagues, or is it, I mean, I presume this will be just your immediate response to what you've heard so far, and I would assume you'll want to come back then with maybe some further elaboration.
Again, thank you to the Chair and the committee for giving us this chance to come along and talk to you this morning. We've been listening to what has been said. There are just a couple of points that I'd like to make at the outset. Firstly, can I just stress that this bill only deals with raising pension age to 67. This bill does not suggest that we go any higher than that at this point in time. Bumper Graham raised 4 key issues whenever I think it was put to him by yourself, Ms. Chair. Firstly, the age issue. He was concerned about the pension age going up. Just the one point that I want to make, though I'm sure you'll have specific queries on it, is that this isn't unique to Northern Ireland or indeed to the UK. This is something which is happening around the world. Pension ages are going up. There's nothing unusual in putting pension age up to 67 at this point in time. The second point he raised was about the number of contributory years required for NICs, that is raising it from 30 to 35 years. Just a general point on that, which is that no one is actually going to suffer as a result of that. My colleagues can explain further as to precisely why that's the case. The third point he raised was about the impact of contracting out in relation to occupational pension schemes. Again, we can talk to you about that, but it isn't something that we believe is a major issue. The fourth point he made was to do with the release of pension pots, and as I think, Mr Chair, you mentioned, that isn't actually something that features in this bill, so it's not really relevant to these discussions. And then the final point, which I think you've just raised, Mr Wilson, is about clause 43, and we'll try and deal with that. So those are the sort of general parameters, but happy to take any questions that you have.
You deal with clause 43 and maybe that.
Okay, as clause 43, at the moment all we've said is that it shall either be some or all. And the reason for that is at this stage that we still haven't such all fully worked out as to which of the various costs that we are going to say that you have to disclose. This would be a point where that if we were to do something different, for example, inside of Northern Ireland, and say that we thought that we should go for all just and not allow any lower margin of sort of flexibility. Our problem would be actually most schemes which are inside Northern Ireland actually are based inside England. So therefore, that if we were to put that extra duty on the scheme, it would actually be all very difficult for us to actually to get it to work and for us to enforce it. However, it is something I can look further into and maybe come back to the committee to say, to give you some further details on this issue.
Just see when it says some or all. Who decides what the sum is? Is it the schemes themselves say that's the information we're giving you, or do we specify what the information should be?
The intention is that this will be set out in law as to which of the various types of a cost which will have to be actually set out.
And can you think of any costs, for example, that would be exempt from this, where you'd be saying, no, you don't have to reveal those costs?
Well, it could be something like a standard cost, which would be the same for all schemes, for example. But I would be happier to go away and to do just a wee bit more checking on it for you before I tell you something if in fact it weren't going to be true.
Would you also, Gary, be able to advise at what point may that be introduced in the law? I mean, is that secondary legislation or?
Yes, that is a power for us to make regulations.
Okay.
So it would be secondary.
Okay, fair enough.
I think Anne also made the point about the flexibility of the pension pots is not part of this bill. Okay, so there's nothing in this which would allow for those to be it's moved around. In terms of the age, actually the number of years from 32 and 35, no one actually ends up with less money, okay, because of that. At the moment, if you have got 30 years under the existing scheme, you would get £113.10. Under the new scheme, in 30 years, will get you £127. So that means that there isn't anybody who shall lose because of this. Actually, everybody gains if you have the full 30 years. But you wouldn't
gain as much. That's
yes, but you don't get as much. But what I'm saying is that you are still better off than you were if we were to carry on with the existing. As to why we went for the 35 as opposed to the 30 or whatever, maybe I should explain that. At the moment, under the existing scheme, we have actually got two rules. Okay, for a full state pension, okay, the basic state pension, which is the amount paid by it's 113. For it, you have to have done 30 years. For the state, it's a second pension. It could be based on working from age 16 up until the point at which you hit state pension age. At the moment, the law shall allow for state pension age ultimately to go up to 68. So that period of years could be 52 years. Okay, and so what we're doing with this new scheme is to merge those two into one, and so the 35 years is a figure which isn't exactly inside the middle, but it's not. What we're aiming to do is to merge these two rules into one. So as opposed to having two rules, one which was 30 and one which was for 52 years. these are being merged into one rule, which says that you have to have worked on for 35 years.
Well, somewhere in the middle of that 20-odd rather than 30-odd.
No, sorry, I'm talking about the gap between the 30 and the, as it were, 52. It's those two rules which we're actually going to merge into one, so the gap is between the 30 and 52.
Okay. And then the impact of the contracting out, is that? Was
Well, I think Mr. Graham said that actually people would have to pay actually more national insurance, but actually wouldn't get anything for it. Well, that is not right. For each year that you would work after 6416, you would earn an extra, and so actually £4.24 per week in state pension, until you have yourself brought up to the figure of £148.40. And so they will gain more.
Okay.
The other point he made, I think, was about the extra costs and for schemes, okay, for the national insurance contributions going up, okay, the 3.4%. However, as we said, I think, and so when we were with the committee before, this isn't something which we have any power over at all. No, okay, national insurance contributions are actually, it's something for Westminster.
Okay, because just to think, at the end of the day, I think it'd be important if, for any of these submissions, particularly where there, well, specifically where there are objections to the bill and there's a defined objective or objection, I think it's important that we're in a position to actually say, well, actually, you're wrong, or, if you're not wrong, there's a rationale that because we have to face whether it's, you can afford to depart from it, as I think as Jim was pushing the bumper on. So, again, I think at the end of the day, what we will need to just make up our mind against all the submissions that we have against us, against what's in the bill and what's incorrect in our submission. So,
and actually the further point was the one on the state pension age, and saying this is going to keep going up and up. Again, I think the point was made by Anne, there is nothing in this bill which actually would allow that to happen. All we're doing is actually bringing forward the age change to 67. Okay, that's all we're doing. And there's nothing else to allow this to go up any further.
okay, Mickey, you're looking back in again?
Yeah, just on the age thing, because I was saying that the bill deals simply with the age in a sense, but it is enabling legislation.
No, there's nothing in this bill to allow that to change further. Any further change to the age would have to have a further bill.
Another bill.
Yeah.
It's a further bill would be necessary for it, and there's nothing to allow it to change further.
Chairman, I think it would be useful just for the officials to give us a summary of the factual inaccuracies that there were, maybe in the submission, and indeed if that is the case in any other submissions, to have that, because it is useful to have.
I mean, what I was actually going to suggest, if there's no other members indicating that they want to ask anything particular at the moment, is there any other points that you want to respond now to?
I was just actually jotting it down very quickly. I'll just have a quick look at my notes here to see if there's anything else. Okay.
I'm surprised Sammy thought it was factual inaccuracies. That observation.
I think one of the points which had been made by NIPSA is instead of having an age for state pension, perhaps we could have a flexible decade and sort of retirement. That issue has been around for a long number of years. I think back in the start of the 1990s was the last time that it was actually looked at with any great seriousness. And the real reason is simply the costs involved are, it's absolutely huge. The other point which was made was that if we put up pension aids, then as to what effect that has on the overall number of jobs and the labour market. Again, I'm not aware of any direct evidence to show that there is a strict correlation between the two, that if somebody leaves work at 65, then that job as such becomes, that job shall therefore be filled by somebody younger. I'm not sure there is any or strict correlation between those two as the factors. The other thing is now, and so with the age laws, I don't think we can actually treat people any differently simply because of their age. I don't think that we can say to somebody, okay, but you're now 65, go. That you have to leave work. I don't think that would be sustainable.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, could, first of all, can I thank yourselves for being here this morning and responding so quickly to some of those issues and certainly bringing that clarity, at least a number of the points there. Members, just in terms of, referred early on there, just if we could just deal this on maybe Jerry, when you're still here. We have scheduled for the 9th of December, which is next Tuesday. We had a session scheduled for next Tuesday. We don't have any oral evidence to take next week, but we do have written. Do we have those written submissions
Chairman,
yet?
we have organisations saying that they're going to submit written submission, but we actually don't have them as it stands now.
Okay, so then really there's no point in meeting then. Members.
But we had offered for our MSIS colleagues from the SSA to brief the committee, actually for the communication plan for the state pension. I think that was one of the issues which had been actually raised last week, as to how will people know of these changes and what they need to do.
My own preference would be, like, to be honest with you, would be to keep it in the diary and to deal with, because if we do have any business to deal with, let's deal with it. You know, that would be my instinct, because it'll be another day that we don't have to do post-Christmas. And we may well get submissions in the next number of days, do you think? Are we indicating from the commission?
Sure, the organisations that have said they will submit, said they would, only as general, so we will submit by the deadline of December 16th.
Okay, well, maybe if we could, could we schedule then, or could we retain our schedule for next week and try and get the SSA up? Could we also go back to those organisations and ask them if there's any chance of getting their submissions earlier? Because it'd be useful. The sooner we get those, the better, I think, for our own information, and then we try to distill down out of them what we need to get specific answers on.
Could I ask, how full is our diary for the Thursday the 11th?
We have, as I understand it, we have Brian Roundtree confirmed for.
He's confirmed.
Yes, just today.
Yeah.
And
So-
I think
Two departmental briefings, I think.
Yeah.
That's okay.
And I think we're here for the pension scheme bill.
Yeah. So our members then content then we retain and okay, so we'll be returning here next Tuesday for the pensions bill. We certainly will have the SSA here to deal with the communications plan, and if there are any additional points from today's discussion in IPSA, Alan and Jerry, your colleagues, you may want to, maybe give us a note to that effect or something.
Yeah, well, certainly, but if you actually share with us about anything that you get in from any of these outside groups, then we can work our way through it and maybe assist the committee on it.
Well, it's just for us. I mean, obviously, it's easier if yourselves are looking at it and saying, well, there's an
Come along
an
as well. I
accuracy.
think
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just
certainly, but we're
point,
more than happy to come back and brief the committee, but just, if we see it, then it means we can
Okay, that's
be able to
excellent.
address the issues.
Okay, thank you for that then. Thanks very much then for that this morning. Okay, members? On that basis then, we're here next Tuesday, so that's the meeting on adjourned. Nothing else under any other business? No, okay, meeting's adjourned. Thank you, members.
This is the Northern